If you appreciate the precision and craftsmanship of barrel-aged craft beer, you have to check out the Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago. This annual festival and competition promises 350 one-of-a-kind pours from the best barrel-aged brewing programs in the country. Elevate your craft beer experience with bold, uniquely crafted beers across 13 style categories. The Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago takes flight November 22nd and 23rd. Get your tickets at fobab.com, FOBAB.com.
Podcast that gets to the bottom of every pint. I'm John Holl, and this week I'm glad to welcome Breandán to the show. He is the author of the soon-to-be-released Hidden Beers of Belgium, which, as the name suggests, covers the beers you might not have heard of from that beer-loving country, but should be drinking. But first, a reminder, please go visit allaboutbeer.com. You can find original articles there, as well as reviews, news, insights, and podcasts. You can listen to shows like Brewer to Brewer and the All About Beer podcast simply by searching All About Beer wherever you listen to shows, and you won't be disappointed. Follow All About Beer on Instagram, Threads, X, and Facebook at All About Beer. And as always, you can keep up with the smoked beer news and releases by checking out This Week in Rauch Beer by searching the group on Facebook, or you can follow at TW Rauch Beer on X, Threads, and Instagram. We also have very, very, very limited glassware and apparel available simply by going to allaboutbeer.com/merch. This show and all of the work we do, it's supported by you. Please visit patreon.com/allaboutbeer. Really, a few bucks goes a long way to fund writers, photographers, creators, and editors. We need your support for independent journalism. And if you'd like to learn more about advertising, please email info@allaboutbeer.com. As always, thanks to this episode's sponsor, which is the Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago. There you can experience the boldest flavors in craft beer from more than 150 of the world's best barrel-aged brewers, all under one roof. The Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer takes flight on November 22nd and 23rd in Chicago. Get your tickets today at fobab.com. That's FOBAB.com. Belgium, when it comes to beer, is a place of dreams and inspiration. There are breweries that have stood as the mark of excellence for decades or longer that showcase old world traditional and sensibilities and have helped brewers and drinkers around the world better understand microbiology. There are many well-known brands, ones that delight and are spoken with in reverence. And then there are the lesser-known beers and breweries. In his new book, Hidden Beers of Belgium, the writer and podcaster behind Belgian Smaak, Kearney, tells the stories that otherwise would have remained quiet. Engaging, thoughtful, thought-provoking. The profiles are illustrated by the wonderful work of photographer Ashley Johanna. What might have been out of sight is now top of mind. And Breandán joined me to talk about the beers, the process, and more. Here's our conversation. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for being on the show this week. I've been reading the book. I've read the book, and I've been going through it again, and I want to talk about it in a minute, but I feel like we need to get a few establishing things established first. And so it has been, I guess, 6 years since I was last in Belgium. And you're covering this daily and thinking about it and drinking it all the time. In your estimation, what's the current state of beer in Belgium right now?
The one thing that I noticed from visiting a lot of places in a kind of very short period of time, say in the last 2.5 years, is that a lot of producers are hurting and they're having a tough time. And I think this is something that's obviously common in a lot of countries around the world. I'm sure it's similar in the States where, you know, maybe people are having more mature business discussions and they're feeling the pain of increased cost of living, raw ingredients and suppliers, prices have gone up. There's, you know, the Ukraine war is still going on here in Europe, which is affecting, you know, lots of different things in terms of logistics and energy. And again, I think there's also a change in the consumer in Belgium, where there is, like in other countries, more of a demand for lower alcohol beers, and people are drinking differently in terms of like the times that they are out and the amount that they go out. So um, producers are finding it difficult, and that's not just small producers, but also bigger producers who maybe are having some routes to market sort of changed or cut. And I think that's really interesting because I don't know how it's going to pan out.
That sounds similar to, I mean, on sort of just broad strokes of what's happening here in the US and even in some other countries as well. Do you see from your reporting from being out in the world, there's obviously worry, there's obviously uncertainty. Are you starting to see any sort of resolve for the long term?
Um, well, I think those that um, are the most passionate. It's the same as it's always been. Those that are the most passionate, those are that are willing to find a way, will find a way because there's nothing else that they want to do. Um, and I think those people will survive because they'll find a way. But you also see that new entrants will also try to have a little bit more of an imaginative approach or carve themselves out into something more unique. Someone like Joel at Brasserie de la Mule in Brussels opens with a very strong kind of German beer identity in Brussels, which is something different. Um, and I think, when you're opening, you obviously have to come with like the full package because nowadays to survive, you need to have great beers, brilliant branding, a good sort of space that you're selling or showcasing your beers. Um, so I think, yeah, there will be some that fall by the wayside and others may have to change their business model. But for those that want to do it, I think there's always going to be a way. And there's so much like niche markets in Belgium. So if you're producing Old Brown or if you're producing acid, you will find a way to get to the people that respect or care about what you're doing, even if it's not on your doorstep.
So the book is Hidden Beers of Belgium. Um, I want to flip that first because I think I have my own answers on this, but I'm curious. Um, what are the best known beers in Belgium right now? Like inside the country?
Well, the best known beers in Belgium right now are the same beers that are the best known beers that have been for the last, couple of decades. So all the poster boys of their style. So Westmalle Triple, Rodenbach, um, Saison Dupont. I mean, you know the list.
Yeah.
What I would say though is in terms of the big beers, is that like some other countries, particularly the UK, brewing in Belgium is very regional, which is sort of an historical hangover and something that has been important in maintaining a lot of the regional sort of heritage of the brewing culture. But because of that, what you have is these kind of larger regional breweries who have sort of evolved what they do based on the exigencies of the market. So, you know, producers of Old Brown have changed into producers of, strong golden ales, have produced into big lager facilities, and they've survived and they've brought, little touches of everything they've done along the way. So in Limburg, you have Martins, which is doing a lot of sort of commercial and contracting. And West Flanders here, you have Van der Hinste and De Brabandere. And every region then will have their, Lefebvre in Henegouwen to the south of the border in the French speaking part. And maybe you have, I know, 30 of these regional breweries across the country who are doing a lot of production. And in their areas, their beers, their lagers, their pilsners are on tap. Their blonde ales are on tap. They own a lot of property, like cafe properties where they distribute. So
Hmm.
in those regions, those beers will be big. And then you have some national brands which will appear everywhere on menus. Um, but I mean, some of those big regional beers may not be that familiar to people outside Belgium just because of, the way that maybe they're not imported to certain places or they have a particular local flavor.
Is there so I mean commercial beer still looms super large, right? I mean, if I go out, I'm still going to see Bud Light and Coors Light and everything around town. What what are what are those beers for you all these days? Is it
Yeah, so
still
you have
Stella? Is it still
yeah, so with InBev, actually the strongest beer is Jupiler, which
uh-huh.
is would be would be stronger in Belgium than Stella, although Stella obviously appears pretty much everywhere. But Jupiler would be the big beer. Then for the Alken Maas Heineken group, you've got Maas Pills,
Mm-hmm.
um, and then basically then it goes down to the regional brewery. So if it's a Hacked bar, you'll have Primus. If it's a Van der Hinste bar, you'll have Bokor. And you kind of know the full range of taps and even the full beer menu based on those logos that you see outside the cafe.
Yeah.
Um, and I guess the interesting thing is the kind of arrival or struggle of independent bars and also independent bottle shops where, some of these breweries can forge a name for themselves and maybe eventually make their way into other bars. Um, but yeah, I think, in other countries, the let's call it like the European lager rather than Pilsner, the European lager is a massive part of the market. And in Belgium, it's still like the biggest part of the market. But I think the like inverted commas specialty beers in Belgium make up a bigger percentage of the market than they might do in other countries, if that makes sense.
Sure. No, that's wild. Um, is there it's interesting having just been in the UK and talking with some folks at breweries and even some free houses that were there. There is not so much the history. The history isn't of beer isn't as top of mind as maybe it was for me in the US when I was coming up. And I see that here as well. Breweries are sort of taken for granted. People know what they like. They see familiar things and they just kind of gravitate towards them. Does the history of beer in Belgium, is that still important to younger generations that you can tell?
No, I think it is. I think it is. I mean
And how is
the
it instilled in them, I guess, is the question to sort of help the rest of us.
I mean what I see is that these brands kind of reach deep into like the fabric of the places that they're from, and there's a much more conservative attitude to beer. There are some producers, for example, who want to base themselves on being the antithesis of the traditional family brewer, but they're much fewer and further between than maybe in other countries. Um, I guess it's just like a good example for the minute. Maybe I'll rewind back. One of the big kind of tensions or central dramatic questions I have in a lot of the stories on Belgian Smack is about this kind of, you know, tradition versus innovation or modernity tension, where it's like, how much do we throw what the family has done for 4 or 5 generations before us and try something new? Or if we're starting out, how much do we, take inspiration from other countries and poo-poo everything that we know and love about, like Belgian beer production and fermentation forward production. And that's always. I mean, there's never any straight answer to that, but it's always like at the heart of a lot of stories about people producing beers that are successful here. Um, so I mean, one example recently of something that's been in the news here just this week is Brouwerij Het Anker, which makes the range, the Golden Carolus range in Mechelen, which is a city kind of between Brussels and Antwerp,
Mm-hmm.
is up for sale as of this week,
Okay.
and that's a family brewery. That's multi generations deep, which is very highly regarded by everyone in the beer industry for producing very good, traditional Belgian ales. They have invested in the brewery while keeping sort of the personality of all that history alive. The the owner, Charles Clay, is also very respected among his peers, brewers, and just I think in the general public. But those guys, perhaps because of economic reasons or perhaps because of succession discussions, are putting the brewery up for sale. And I think there's a lot of discussion in Mechelen right now about what that means for, beer in the city, because everyone has been so proud of that brewery and loves that brewery so much. And it's absolutely everywhere in every single cafe. Um, I don't know what's going to happen there, but again, that's yeah, maybe that is something that's also quite particular to Belgium as opposed to other countries, and something which makes Belgium unique.
Yeah, I like that. So let's talk about the book and where the one, I guess, the idea came from, and then two, why a book like this is needed right now.
Great question, John. uh,
I hope I didn't sound like an asshole in saying that. Like, yeah.
Oh no, it's
Because I
absolutely
don't mean
perfect.
it that
But
way, but yeah.
it's like I have like 10 different ways to join this answer, but let me try and be as succinct as I can. Well, the first thing to say is I think that the the title of the book is it's quite hooky. It's a little bit mysterious, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it definitely draws people in to see how much of these beers do I know? What does he mean by hidden? And what's in this book? I think the content of it essentially, which is deep dives into the stories of the people that make the beer, the places that they're from, and how the beers came about, together with like as much technical information about the beers as I could draw out of people. It's kind of the thing that I've been doing for the last 10 years for Belgian Smack and other publications. So it's kind of, I guess, on one way, it's the culmination of like all the travel I've done, all the discussions of the interviews, all the things that I've learned, um, to kind of put into one book. The kind of more salacious story about how it came to be was I was working with the photographer Ashley Joanna on a series for Belgian Smack called Humans of Belgian Beer,
Okay.
which was essentially a portrait photography series with like micro stories about people on the periphery of Belgian beer culture. So not the hero superstar brewers, but the guy who takes kegs from breweries and makes a surfboard, or the the woman who serves beer in the bowling alley, or
Yeah.
the people that maybe take beers on their hot balloon races and stuff. So like there was a whole series of like interesting, weird, and wonderful characters, and the thing was to tell the story of these people through the photography, and to also try to find as much as many inspiring people as possible. And so we did that for like 2 or 3 years, and we felt it would be a good book project. So we pitched Humans of Belgian Beer. Obviously, it's very much modeled on the Humans of New York series
Yeah.
as well. But we pitched that to the publisher, and they said to us, "Look, this sounds more like a magazine project. Um, so we don't think it's commercial enough for us, but we like the cut of your jib. And if you were to pitch us another idea, then we would be certainly open to discussions." So we jumped on the phone with each other, myself and Ashley, and we looked through the back catalogue of the publisher, Luster Publishing,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a series of travel books: Hidden Secrets of Ghent, Hidden Secrets of Paris, Hidden Secrets
Sure.
of Amsterdam, Hidden Secrets of New York. And the idea popped into my head: Hidden Beers of Belgium. And we talked through it to sort of see what we thought it might look like. And we sent a quick pitch back to Luster, and they just sent an email to say, "When can you come to meet us in Antwerp?" And then we arranged the meeting, and we sat around the table in their big, beautiful office with all their lovely books. And we talked through the idea, and then, yeah, we signed a contract and got to work.
I love that. There's something to be said, having done a couple of books myself, there's something to be said of getting in a publisher's wheelhouse of something that they're already comfortable with, and just, you know, finding that square peg for the square hole.
Yeah, it
for
was
them,
like
as opposed to going in just like, I have this totally batshit crazy idea that's unlike anything else that you've ever done before. And if you ever want to see a publisher get nervous, that's the approach you take.
yeah, I mean, and it was this match of the kind of the stuff that I was already doing and something that we could like showcase stories and beautiful photography and like the cultural element as well as lots or as much sort of, beer technical information as we could put together, but also like making it fit, the packaging of how they normally sell and distribute books. So I was really happy when we got the title and we kind of set out the vision and agreed it because I knew we could do that and I knew that it was a strong title from the beginning.
Yeah.
Um,
It's a very, yeah, no, I mean, when you first reached out about this, I was immediately curious. There is that human desire to know the things that we don't know. And especially for those of us in and around the beer space and who really enjoy it, the title sort of grabs you pretty quick. Um, I imagine that you started with a pretty long list and then whittled it down to the ones that are in here. What were you looking for when it came to the beers to the breweries that you were eventually going to profile? What is the connective tissue in your mind that exists for all of them contained in this book?
yes, there's obviously there was a few things at the front of my mind when I was, yeah, like you said, chopping down the long list to the final 24 beers that would appear in the book. And, you know, I do have a list of 60 beers at the back of the book, which are
Mm-hmm.
like extra suggestions, which I feel like I needed to include some of those, maybe which are the rules I kind of slightly bent to include some of those than the rules I set out for the first 24.
Okay.
But, we wanted 24 where we kind of in the book made it a kind of beautiful like coffee table photography book for each one. We made it a useful technical fact sheet for beer enthusiasts and home brewers and commercial brewers. And then we also made it like a narrative story, which, would pull people through just because of the strength of the story itself. And that
Mm-hmm.
was kind of and those are like, in a way, they're three different ideas that we wanted to like compress into this one book. Um, so I guess the things in mind for cutting down from long list to short list, um, firstly, obviously the quality of the beers that I selected had to be good. So I had to like stand by, every one that I was profiling. Secondly, I wanted to make sure that there was some geographical representation. So it would be very easy to, to make 24 a book of 24 beers from Vlaams Brabant, so that's the area southeast and around Leuven, southeast of Brussels around Leuven. Be very
Yeah.
easy to make a book with just full of West Flemish beers because of the density of breweries in that region. Whereas for somewhere like, for example, Limburg, province of Limburg on the east of the country, it's much harder to find, a lot of interesting breweries or great, unique beer stories. Similar
Mm-hmm.
parts of Wallonia are also maybe less dense with that because of a number of like historical and economic and social reasons. So that was like geographical representation so that we could try to showcase like how rich, the entire country was. Then also style diversity because, you could again very easily do the hidden triples of Belgium or
Yeah.
I mean and I don't know if anybody wants to read a
But
book
I was
called
going to
called
say,
the
yeah, is
the
there an
hidden.
audience for that? Yeah.
I think there's more of an audience for hidden triples of Belgium than there is for hidden IPAs of Belgium. But and I didn't want to do that. I kind of wanted to make sure that, I had an opportunity in the book to talk about the evolution of wit beer that I had, that I could show that brewers were being inspired by some of the kind of hop forward beers that are coming out of other countries, that there was also a sort of a reinvigoration of certain, let's call them more boring styles like Special Belge. So,
Sure.
um, yeah, style diversity was another thing. And then I think also a major consideration for me was story. So, um, and I don't mean that in the context of the beer had to have an incredible story behind it. It absolutely did. But what I mean by that is that I wasn't including two beers that had very similar stories because I wanted every single entry to be something totally different, whether it was, a love story or a story against the clock, like the Triumph story where,
Hmm.
the institution of the Verdought Cafe is sort of tasked with producing this anniversary beer at the very last minute. Or if it was, a story where it was mostly about overcoming some tragedy, like the Misery story, where the brewery was kind of flooded during the massive floods in the summer of 21.
Yeah,
So the kind of the story had to be stand up on its own and not be too similar to other. Because you mean there are a lot of producers in Belgium which have great stories, but maybe they're a bit similar in terms of like family heritage or in terms of like the reasons that they're producing a type of beer. So like with all that together, and I guess the final consideration was um about the actual producers themselves, because there are some producers like that I really wanted to include. And whether that was producers that I felt people should know about, for example, the new blendery in Huizinge, Borenaar from by the farmer Sella Inenbos, which
hmm.
is doing very exciting, like Malsa, like soft, citrusy lambic, uh,
Ooh,
coming from the school of Driefonteinen. Uh, or if it was like a more well-known producer like Dupont, everyone knows Monette, everyone knows Saison. But actually this, the smoke deal that they produce is like people don't really know about it. And it's a very successful beer in Ghent, and it's got totally got their footprints all over it. So um and in that regard, it was difficult for me to leave out certain breweries. So for example, in the 24, I don't have De La Seine as a hidden beer because I feel, they're just so well known and so highly respected that I just couldn't put them in. Other people like
sure.
Trifontaine or Cantillon, I didn't put in, even though I may have mentioned them sort of in the beers at the back.
Yeah,
Um, so it's not to say that because a beer's not included that it's I don't respect the producer. I didn't feel the producer was worthy, but it was just like for this brief, like to be appropriate for this book, Hidden Beers of Belgium. I set out a bunch of rules at the start, and I wanted to kind of follow those.
I like that. You mentioned something before, and I want to talk about the reporting out of this book as well. You talked about the technical details of the beer, and how much you could draw out of the brewers. And I remember when I first started writing about beer 20 years ago and 20 plus years ago, and especially when I got to All About Beer for the first time, and I started covering international beer. In the US, I could call up pretty much any brewer and say, "Hey, tell me about this beer," and I'd get absolute recipes and mash temperatures and fermentation times, pretty much anything that I needed to know or was even remotely curious or even didn't want to know. Brewers were giving up, and then I started talking to Belgian brewers who were famously tight-lipped about the beers that they're making and how they're making it, and would speak in vague, broad generalities. So I don't know, one, if that's changed with the newer generation, or if that's a tradition that continues on. But something makes me feel like the way that you phrase that, trying to draw out the technical details from the breweries, that this still stands. Is that accurate?
Um, I think it's accurate. I mean, I'm surprised you even got like email replies from Belgian breweries. That's like notoriously difficult. That's why
Back in
you
the
have
day,
to
the All
kind.
About Beer name meant something. So yeah.
Yeah.
But because
Uh,
Jackson worked for us. So
yeah, yeah. Um, no, I mean there obviously were some producers who would just, tell me exactly not only the strain of commercial yeast they were using, but like how they would hydrate it or how they would add it, and tell me all the hop varieties they were using. And we would have like some of them we would have deep conversations about like water chemistry, which was really interesting. And then obviously a lot, I mean, they just won't tell you anything, and they won't even tell you like the types of malt they're using,
right,
which it's like, I mean,
makes
I can
makes it
probably
difficult.
guess.
Yeah.
I can probably guess, but it's not like it's a massive secret. So, um, and again, with those, my approach was to just keep asking. So visits obviously to every single brewery, some of them multiple times. phone interviews, and lots of emails. So yeah, with those, you just keep pushing, or you try to speak to someone else who might be more willing to give you some information.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I think I mean, I'm really happy with how I managed that process because I think I managed to put on paper like more than I think anybody else has done across a range of Belgian beers. Um, and having some production experience myself, I understand like how useful that can be when you're formulating a recipe yourself or trying to understand like why a beer tastes the way it does. And you don't necessarily need all the percentages and you don't necessarily need all the, the mash temperatures and stuff. But if you have some idea about sort of hot side, cold side, and conditioning, then it's a good way to understand the beer.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, I don't think there are still lots of producers who are very uncomfortable talking about like their beers in any detail, and I would say particularly relating to fermentation.
Why do you think that is?
Um, I think probably among the Belgian public, there's probably still a mystery around it. Um, in terms of like I mean the in terms of like the specialty beer segment, and note I don't use the word craft when I'm
Mm,
just talking about Belgian beer. And I think like the triple or the strong blonde or strong golden ale is those are the kind of the styles which are sort of most commercially successful for producers. And those are obviously very fermentation forward beers. So, whether it's sort of straight up banana or going over to apricot or even sometimes like citrus, there's a
hmm.
lot of, and then you have all the spice, whether it's like, black pepper or some, some spiciness in them. So there's a lot of flavor profile there. And I think that's what people know and expect from like a specialty beer in Belgium, and that's what they enjoy. So I think that for the general public, there's this mystery about that fermentation forward flavor profile and how Belgian beers are produced. And I think that maybe some of the more conservative brewers are less, willing to bust that bubble.
Yeah.
Um, and the way that I overcame it as well was to kind of show them that I understood production a little bit. And I think by some of my questions, they knew, oh, I can't just say what I normally say to people here. Um, and I had the advantage too that, if you're an American writer or journalist coming in, you probably are quite limited in time.
Also true.
Uh,
Yeah.
you're coming for a couple of days, whereas like I can come back here and just ask the same questions again. So, and I can also jump into like whatever language the brewer speaks to also meet them halfway and maybe perk up their ears a bit more. So, and I've, obviously I've learned, um, like terms, brewing terms in Dutch and French as well. So that, we can like I can ask specifically about that. But yeah, no, it is difficult, and a lot of them aren't willing to share. Um, but I mean, there are others who will tell you everything. So it just depends on who you're talking
Yeah.
to.
Those are the easier days. And I'm glad you brought that up just simply for the way that journalism in the beer space is these days. I get a lot of travel pitches where it's somebody saying, oh, I'm going to such and such for a weekend and I'd love to write about this. And it's like, well, no, I want somebody who is totally immersed in the scene. And I recognize even as a journalist my own limitations where if I was going back to Brussels or Belgium or like one of your cities or the whole country, then I could write certain things, but certainly nothing as in depth as this. You can do quick hits, and it speaks for, I think, the need in our space for people who have a beat, who understand the region, the area, the raw ingredient, whatever it is that they can cover better than anybody else. And this book is certainly an example of that. That's just a quick journalism aside. You brought it up, so I'm going to ask you on it. You don't use the word craft. I support that. But why?
I don't want to make a big point about it, but like I don't know what it means. And if I'm writing
100%. Yeah.
if I'm writing about Belgian beer, there's just so many other ways I can talk about beer that are more convey more to the reader about what I'm talking about. Um,
Do your
yeah, so
brewers
that's
care about the word?
it's um I feel that sometimes when they use it, uh, I mean, if you want to like a one word answer, I'll say no. But I feel like some that do use it without all the baggage of like the defined term from the Brewers Association, and
Yeah.
they mean it more in like a conversational way of saying artisanal, rather than like a sector of the industry.
Hmm.
I think there are brewers in Belgium who maybe especially look internationally in terms of a lot of export, and I think they're jealous of the word, um, that it's not referred to them as much because maybe their products are seen as more traditional, even though they feel that they're craft. I just also think like it's difficult enough to use it, in the US and the UK, but like how do you apply craft to Old Brown or to Trappist or to I just don't think I don't think it's like useful. So it's not that I have anything like against people who say craft, that's fine, but I just personally have never found found it useful to use.
Agreed. Um, yeah. I mean, I use it, but there's no good definition of it, and yeah, I have a lot of frustrations with the word itself. But I know Ashley's not on the call, and I'm sorry about that because this is as wonderful as the write-ups are, and they really are. The photography really brings me in to these places in such a meaningful way. Because the photography in this is really varied. You get some people shots, some action shots, some stark scene setting shots, close up brewing shots. There's so much that your writing gets enhanced because of the attached images. And I'm wondering when you and Ashley were talking about, you know, one that first project and then what this morphed into, was there a conscious photography thought as to what you wanted this to be?
Absolutely. Yeah, everything was very intentional. So I guess that the difference is that, a lot of the times an author will write a book and then the book will be delivered to a photographer. There may be a brief discussion and then they
Yeah.
go off and shoot the book. Or sometimes they don't even have a discussion. Sometimes the author will also shoot the book if they have any photography skills. With this, what we wanted to shoot the stories. So we wanted to like define what the stories were about and then shoot to that. So, for example, there's a story in the book about Valeur Blonde, which is from a brewery in Havre called Brouwer Contreras, and
Hmm.
it's kind of the story of the bravery of a guy who just takes over a brewery that's falling apart in a small village in East Flanders, and it's got a lot of history to it, and about all the things that he has to do with the Federal Agency for Safety that who didn't understand beer production and just the kind of all the archaic equipment. But Valor is the name of the statue in the town, and um, it was named after kind of a battle in Ghent, but also one of the town inhabitants, Valor. So it's like a really important statue, and it's like a kind of a symbol, little thematic sort of motif in the story. So we needed like an amazing picture, and like it's so important in the culture of the village that there's a brotherhood of the Valeur, which is they wear all their gowns and they come out for ceremonial village sort of events. And I was like, right, we got to put the brotherhood in their gowns with their hats and everything at the statue with the Valor beer in their hands just to get this one shot, which we can like basically shoot the story. And every story has multiple photographs, but that's one we wanted.
Yeah.
So Ashley drives 3 hours to this village and calls me, and she says the Brotherhood are here and they're all in their gowns, but the we can't get at the statue because everything around it is a construction site and there are diggers and construction workers here. So we're not allowed to actually go in. And I was like, I was like, okay, well, you can't leave without getting this, right? So,
Yeah.
so, and Ashley told me that the Brotherhood, this group of whatever 7 or 8 people, were very, patient, and they basically went and had a discussion with the construction company. And they're walking across. They managed to get it where they could get as close to the statue as possible. And Ashley would kind of shoot from beneath, shoot up, so that she would see only their top of their gowns, their faces, and the beer, and then the statue behind them. And you wouldn't capture the kind of the background landscape of the construction site.
Yeah, there's no orange vests. Yeah.
Right. So, and also the ground is all completely dug up, so it looks awful, and it takes away from like the thing that we're trying to showcase. So, eventually get they're walking over all the muck, and they're carrying the glasses to pour, because it has every beer has a specific glass, as and that all had to be prepared. So, like, it's not that Ashley rocks up to the brewery to just shoot someone looking at a glass of beer. It's like every story has like certain like a quest that the protagonist had to overcome, and we wanted to try to show those struggles and show like the character of the place that they're from, so that we could basically show off the diversity of Belgian beer. And like that story is just one of many challenges and many sort of urgent phone calls that we had to take. But the beauty of it was that actually, rather than working with some photographer that we didn't know, we could shape it the way we wanted and talk about each story itself and what might be a good idea to do. So, and Ashley is just extremely creative. She's also a brilliant people person, which I think comes across really well in how she gets people to like disarm in front of camera. She is also she's got an extremely good work ethic. So it's a real pleasure working with someone who just wants the final product to be as high a quality as possible. And I think there's definitely a style of photography in the book that is a little bit more dramatic, that is a little bit more cinematic than, maybe certainly I would have been able to capture if I was shooting, or maybe any other photographer. So we have this kind of cinematic, dramatic visual landscape to back up what I hope are also fairly dramatic stories.
Yeah, I'm looking now. So for those of you playing along at home, we're talking about the photograph on page 119. And what's incredible to me now, knowing that story, is the 5 people in this photo look absolutely joyful to one be having their picture taken, to be holding this beer, to be standing by this statue. You would never know that the hassle or the hoops that they went through. And in this moment, it just looks like it is a perfectly nice overcast day to be enjoying a beer in a statue without any of that. And that's a true credit to Ashley as well, to be able to, get folks that happy that quick after all of that. That's really cool. That's really fun.
Maybe I shouldn't have said anything now. Maybe I should.
No, I like, but
this
I think
is like
that adds
making
to
the sausage.
No. But I think that that's sort of the fun thing as well, because it shows the intentionality of you both putting this book together and the subject matter, right? It's not just somebody who's saying, oh, I'm making a hazy IPA with Citra Mosaic and, it sells fairly well. All of these stories that are in here are deliberate looks at a beer, deliberate making of a beer to convey a sense of place, a sense of person, sense of personality, whatever it is. And a story like that you just conveyed, I feel the book matches the energy of the subject matter within.
Yeah, I mean, like the work that went in, like just talking about the photography side, that's one story, but we had brewers that didn't show up, where Ashley had driven across the country and we had to think on our feet. Ashley at one point had a hard drive damaged, and we had to reshoot, I think it was 3 shoots, which meant going back to the brewers and setting it up, and actually turned out better because she knew exactly what she needed to get and how to improve on what she got the last time. She broke her wrist at one point and had
Oh
to
my gosh.
get two or three people, and it was fairly close to deadline, and get a couple of assistants to go in. So she was shooting some of that in it, and it was like for me as well. I had all these, like there was a few beer. There was one beer that I wanted to include in the book, and I had done multiple interviews. We had shot the story, and I got a call about 2 months before submitting final copy that they were filing for bankruptcy, and it was a beautiful story. This lovely couple, and they were basically moving their family from Belgium to Brazil, and I was like, okay, now I have to basically take them out of the book.
Yeah.
There was other beers that changed story, like so the story of the Plukker, which is this very classic Belgian ale, 6.1%, brewed by a hop farmer in the northwest around Poperinge. And they sold the brand to another brewery, which was also another hop farm. So that kind of was a whole story that had to be rejigged, but one I really wanted to keep in because of the beer and what it represented for that region. And of course, we were shooting harvest and all that sort of stuff. That's the only like hop story in the beer,
Yeah.
in the book. So like, and I was like really, um, the thing I wanted most was the stories to be strong, so that like you just couldn't stop reading from paragraph to paragraph. That it was really narrative driven. That there was like every story had a plot, and I had a bunch of editors for different things to help me throughout. So my brother, who's a playwright and theater director, helped me with some story consultancy on like what's the thing that actually fucking matters in this. And then I had Laura Bullen, who is a former editor for Good Beer Hunting, help me with the line editing and also with the fact checking in terms of like the beer sort of knowledge and the beer technical stuff. And then I had two editors at Luster to also do like cultural fact checking in terms of names, places, cultural references in Belgium. So like I know that Ashley and myself and Luster, we couldn't have done any more to make this book better. This is all I could do. This is the best I could have produced. And like we're all pretty exhausted, but I think that's okay.
um yeah, anybody who's written a book, the exhaustion part is that's it's real. But it's so nice to hear that you're also proud of this as well, because like I've talked to other authors who they get to the deadline and it's like, all right, it is what it is. But I really loved reading this book, and feeling energized about returning to Belgium, returning to some of these small breweries, and not even as a reporter, but just as a drinker, just as somebody who now understands these places in the way that you conveyed them, and being able to just go and sit at a table and have a nice quiet beer. And it's you both and the whole team behind it just did a wonderful job. Before I let you go, I want to ask you the Green Door question, which is started during the pandemic on this show. My wife and I rewatched a television show called The Good Place, where in the final season, they introduce a concept of a green door where the characters can walk through it and be anywhere they want, doing whatever they want to be doing. So if we had a green door on our plane of existence and this conversation ended and you could walk through it and be at any pub or any brewery anywhere in the world, where would you want to go? Who would you want to be with? And what would you like to be drinking?
Oh, does everyone give you like a quick, simple answer to this?
It depends. I mean, typically I would say, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Because that's usually the right answer. But you can overthink it if you want. That's fine.
No, I have like an emotional answer, and I have
Great.
like a beer answer. The emotional answer is there's a pub in Northwest Donegal, on the western periphery of the European continent, next stop Iceland,
Uh-huh.
in this very rural part of Ireland called Elliott's, near the village of Doochery, Littermac Award. And it's basically, yeah, it's like near the beach, this beautiful beach that there's never anybody at, with huge sand dunes, amazing Atlantic surf. And I went up there every summer for family trips with my parents and my brothers, and that was like, it's a real Irish pub experience. So I think, like, to be there, there's a sense of peace. It's real beauty, and because I live in Belgium, maybe I'm pining for that type of experience. If I was to answer you beer, I would walk through a door and I would be in a old brown cafe, maybe in Brussels,
Okay.
with a eau de Gueuze, simple, nothing too complicated, just something with lots of acid, lots of citrus, lots of carbonation, and enamel signs everywhere, plenty of wood, tobacco stained walls,
Mm-hmm.
crammed around a wooden table and feeding off conversation. That's for me, that's a great beer experience.
I love it.
That's a nice green door.
Yeah, that's see, now I want to do that. And that's what the censor's all about. The book is called Hidden Beers of Belgium. It's available where? I mean, I guess you can get it online, right? And is it on where fine books are sold? Okay.
Yeah, it's like in America, it's like obviously Amazon,
Sure.
but bookshop dot
Yep.
org. You have a thing called Target. You have something called Walmart. All those places have it. Like it's like generally commercially available. I'm hoping obviously in your local bookshop or independent shop, but I know that all the big players have it because the distributor, there's a US distributor for the book. So I'm hoping there's not too much problems finding it.
That's to be in Target and Walmart at this time of year. That's pretty awesome. So congratulations on that. That's a
Yeah.
huge achievement, sales wise. So, yeah, have at it, everybody. Go get this book, Hidden Beers of Belgium. Thanks for being on the show this week. Thanks for taking the time. Thanks for writing this. This is the type of journalism that the beer space needs these days, and I'm glad you're doing it.
Thanks a lot, John. I really appreciate you saying that, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. So thanks a lot.
Questions, comments, guest suggestions. It's easy to do all of that simply by emailing me at John Holl, that's JOHNHOLL at allaboutbeer.com. Last reminder, go visit allaboutbeer.com. There you can check out the podcast page, the merch page, and read great new content, as well as our archives, which go all the way back to 1979. All About Beer is on social media at allaboutbeer. And if you're interested in supporting journalism in the beer space, you can email us at info@allaboutbeer.com to learn more, or simply go to patreon.com/allaboutbeer and donate a few bucks. Speaking of all of that, here's a word from this week's sponsor.
Can you try over 350 one-of-a-kind beers from all across the country? The Festival of Wood and Barrel-Aged Beer in Chicago. Otherwise known as FOBAB, this legacy tasting event and competition is the largest of its kind in North America, promising the best and boldest flavors in craft beer over 2 days. With over 150 breweries pouring across 13 style categories, there's a drink here for every palate. Join us on November 22nd and 23rd in Chicago. Buy tickets today at fobab.com, FOBAB.com.
Don't forget, All About Beer has a podcast channel now. Search and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Steal This Beer has new episodes every Monday. The BYO Nano podcast comes out on the 15th of every month. And check out probrewer.com each week for original articles from the All About Beer team. As for this show, Nate Schweber does the music. Jeff Quinn designed our logo. I'm John Holl, reminding you to go vote. And new episodes release every Wednesday. That's when I'll be back again to drink beer and to think beer.